For a second and tell us a little bit of what's going on here.
Well, here he's got me in the nerve hold. He's got me in the back. You know, I found out one thing. Snake Williams, I don't like his tactics. They're similar to the other people I used to associate with. But one thing I do have to admit, he is a very tough customer. He's a darn good wrestler, you know, and I give him a lot of credit. You know, he had me right here. My back was hurting. It hurt for about a week after that. He had that nerve hold. He's in the lower back. I couldn't do very much at that point right there.
He really likes to use these submission-type holds, doesn't he?
He does. He's a strong man. He's got strong hands and strong forearms. It's in his fingers. I wrestled him prior to this match once. He used his hands a great deal through the match in a lot of nerve holds.
Well, at this point, you look like you're hurting a little bit, Rick.
I was trying to get out of it. I was just trying to move around, you know. One thing I try to do whenever I'm in the ring, I try to keep agile. There, he just picked me up for a suplex. Boom, that hurt. It hurts to even watch it right now.
I don't know how you can even stand up after a suplex.
Well, you know, you get in the center of that ring. I don't know how many people have been in the ring, but that is not very soft. You know, there's plywood under there. There's just maybe about a half inch of softness. The rest is plywood and twisted steel. Here I tried for a sunset. I got him, but it wasn't too successful. He got on the ropes and he got away from it.
Ring-a-ding-dong dandy, and away we go with another edition of the Stampede Wrestling Show.
Hello, Stampede Wrestling fans, and welcome to the Ring-a-Ding-Dong Dandy podcast. We've got a special one for you today. We're going to be featuring Rick Patterson, better known as Leatherface for much of his career throughout his time in Japan. Now, Leatherface, formerly known as Rick Patterson, is a little bit on the shy side, and so he doesn't come out and do his speaking for himself, but he actually gave us some recorded answers, and he's provided them to one of his old managers and friends, General CJ. And General CJ is joining us today. How are you doing, sir?
Oh, very good, sir. I'm glad to be back on your podcast for one more episode. As previously, you know, I had just done one with an old Stampede Wrestling legend, Kenny Johnson.
That's great. That was a couple episodes ago with Kenny. He was a great interview for that. You did well as well. We're looking to talk about Rick. Now, Rick Patterson grew up in Canada. He actually grew up in Manitoba. Can you tell us a little bit about how Rick got into the sport when he was breaking in with New Brand Wrestling in Winnipeg?
Yes, as you mentioned there, Rick grew up just outside of Winnipeg, Manitoba, and he had a cousin that lived in Winnipeg. I told him about the wrestling shows that had been going on at the Chalmers Community Club in the city. Well, up until then, Rick was just watching the live wrestling at the Winnipeg Arena, which was promoted by a famous promoter there, Vern Gagne, out of the AEWA in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Well, at that time, that was the only wrestling show that was on TV every Saturday night at 6, and then All-Star Wrestling out of Vancouver came on at 2 p.m. the same day. Well, Rick, he decided to go down to the Chalmers Community Club, paid $2 at the door, and walked in, and then not knowing that would take over the next 34 years of his life. Well, you know what? He first saw wrestlers like Playboy, Doug McCall, Ricky Reno, Scotty Lightfoot, Mike Stone, and Marty Price. Those 5 guys, even till today, are still his good friends. The wrestling show was run by a guy by the name of Walter Stefchuk, and the matches were performed in a small gymnasium in front of about 50 people. But Walter had a wrestling ring and fans that could sit about 2 meters from the ringside, and that gave everybody a great feeling of being close to the action. He was soon recruited by Walter, and Rick paid him $300 to train. After a few basic lessons in the judo room at the University of Winnipeg, it was time for Rick to head into the ring and be a part of Walter's show. It was a lot of fun for Rick to break into wrestling at Chalmers. While in high school, Rick played most of the sports, but he always loved watching wrestling on TV. So the wrestling became natural.
And Rick he's such a big guy, and he's a natural athlete. He must have done a lot of sports in high school before he got into wrestling.
Yeah, you know, he got into basketball and that kind of thing. So we'll get into the little basketball thing a little bit later when he got into Stampede.
That sounds good. Now, after Rick did his training, he did some training in Winnipeg. He took some background in judo too, I think. He went to All-Star Wrestling in Vancouver and then split his time with Stampede Wrestling in Calgary. Did he ever talk about how he could compare the management styles of All-Star's Al Tomko and Stampede's Stu Hart?
Well, you know what? Both of them were larger promotions. And Stu had the larger promotion and Al had stronger TV. Both sometimes they worked in small towns, but on average, Stu could draw about a few thousand people a night, but Al could only do maybe around 300 per show. You know, Stu would run a large crew of 15 to 20 wrestlers, where Al would often run with maybe 7 guys. Even though Al paid well and nightly in cash, Stu paid that double, but once a week by check. So if anybody ever needed extra money on the road, both promoters were always happy to advance whatever cash they needed.
Sounds like they had their pros and cons. Both had their benefits. All-Star Wrestling was all across the country, right? There was TV going on in Manitoba and Ontario. Stampede at the time was kind of more local within the Alberta area.
Yeah, both promotions were tough, you know, with sometimes hard schedules, and they often say that many guys were fired in front of them. Rick, you know, earlier on, he developed a habit of keeping his head down and basically just working as hard as he could every match. You know, Rick would always stay positive and not say too much and just keep his eyes and ears open. You know, earlier on, Al could be very vocal and tough if a match wasn't up to his standards. But Rick, he learned, you know, what he wanted to see with happy fans and lots of action. You know, eventually Al grew into a father figure for Rick. And he was always easygoing, Al. When Rick first met Stu, he stuck to Rick as being a very quiet person. And when he would walk into a room, the entire place would just go silent. He remembers whenever he would walk into the dressing room, you know, Rick would always keep his mouth shut. And even if his boots were tied, he would untie them and then keep his head down and retie his boots. Stu was very much respected by all the boys in the dressing room and well known for being tough. You know, Rick had heard about Stu stretching guys that thought they knew everything. And he wasn't going to be one of them.
It's amazing when you hear the stories about Stu. He'd be downstairs stretching guys in the dungeon, but then going upstairs and doing makeup for his daughters and cooking spaghetti for 12. I mean, Stu was an amazing guy.
Oh, yeah, for sure, you know, and as time went on, you know, Rick would get invited to the famous Hart family dinners and stuff and enjoy Stu's cooking. And Helen was also a very good cook, Stu's wife.
Did he ever talk about going down into the dungeon?
No, Rick really didn't have to go down to the dungeon. He just worked his schedule with Stampede while he was in there in his time.
Now, when Rick was in Calgary, he must have had some people helping support him. I'm sure some of the Hart brothers would have helped him out at that time.
Yeah, he gives a lot of thanks to Wayne. Wayne Hart, as we know, was the main referee, the senior referee in Stampede for many, many years. Well, when Rick first got to the territory, Wayne was nice enough to take him in and let him live in his basement of one of his beautiful multi-apartment style houses that Wayne shared with Dynamite Kid and a few other tenants that were in the private apartments of the house. You know?
So I'm sure that Rick spent some of his nights at some of those Hart dinners. He must have got to know a lot of the other Harts during that time as well.
Well, he really didn't get to know a whole lot of them. You know, everybody, you know, reminiscing, and it was always like a little camaraderie, I guess.
Did he ever have any stories about Owen? Because when he was there, Owen would have still been a teenager at that time, probably.
Well, I guess there was a little bit, you know, when I guess one time they were down in the dungeon and Owen was down there training, and he was training one of the Annis kids. I take it would probably be Teddy Hart, and Teddy would hear Owen softly call, you know, for a tackle, and would do it again, and the kid would run, you know, through the imaginary ropes and come back to the spot flawlessly. One of the biggest things that you know, that Owen did for, you know, his nephews and stuff, you know, with their training. So I think a lot of thanks should be given to Owen from Teddy.
At the start of the podcast, we got to hear Rick Patterson being interviewed by Ed Carl in All-Star Wrestling. At the time, he was wrestling Snake Williams. Now we're going to get a special treat. This is from the debut of Rick Patterson in Stampede Wrestling as he faces off against Honky Tonk Wayne.
Let us now face the old papers on Honky Tonk Wayne, the 242-pounder from Memphis, Tennessee, looking a little reluctant about coming in that ring right now. The opposition, good-looking young man that's new to this territory, Rick Patterson. He's at 230, and he's out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Jams him into the corner. He's going after Wayne. Gonna give him a ride now. Oh, no. Oh, no. There is no question the crowd loves to hate Honky Tonk Wayne.
I'll tell you what, he doesn't have very many kind words for many of the local athletes either. He's been saying nasty things about Willie DeWitt, about Lanny McDonald. The man is mean. He's got an unlisted personality.
I like that. Oh, yes. We have just gone past the 5-minute mark. Wayne Hart, the referee. Good right hand by Patterson. He rallies momentarily, but that's all.
It must have been amazing with Owen growing up in a wrestling family, always training, and then here he's training a 6-year-old Teddy Hart. That's amazing. Now, when Rick was there, I want to know, who was cooking supper? Was it Stu or was it Helen?
Well, for the most part, Stu did a lot of the cooking. You know, even in the non-Sunday dinners, Stu did most of the cooking for the kids and stuff because Helen was always upstairs in the office working the business and stuff and really didn't have time. But when she did have time, she was a good cook, and Rick remembers being there at least one time when, you know, Helen did cook the meal, and it reminded him of his mom's own cooking. So
that's good. It must be like home style. So looking back on it, he had a lot of pros and cons to how Stu and Al ran their businesses, but it sounds like he had a very favorable look on how both of them ran it, whether it was All-Star Wrestling in BC or Stampede in Calgary.
Yeah, he thought Stu and Al were very similar in many ways. For the most part, they were easygoing, but could both easily, flip a business switch and get serious very fast. And Rick misses them both very much.
So after Rick spent a few years with Manitoba and then British Columbia and Alberta, he started making some forays into the United States. And I think the first place he went to was Central States in Kansas City. So I'm interested to know, was Bob Brown big in playing a role in getting him into the USA, given that Bob Brown had a big background in Winnipeg?
Yeah, Bob Brown, the old Bulldog, he played an important role in getting Rick work in Kansas City. If he could write a book, Bob would be in his own chapter. He was a good friend and a good booker. The Cuban Assassin, first asked Rick if he wanted to go to Kansas City and actually get booked there, and Rick and the Cuban, during the summer, they would go to the Maritimes, to Grand Prix Wrestling under promoter Emile Dupree. So then when they first met up in Calgary, they made the transition from the East to Western Canada much easier. Kansas City was a very hard place because he didn't make a lot of money. Fortunately, he got to meet many great people there and it worked out better to be the better money as the days went on.
Get prepared for St. Patrick's Day with Manscaped if you're going to get a little lucky. Manscaped is the global leader for below-the-waist grooming and the official sponsor of the Dave Dynasty Show. To ensure you have the best tools for your family jewels, visit manscaped.com and use the code DYNASTY20 for 20% off and free international shipping. You're in luck because Manscaped Performance Package is the ultimate in men's hygiene bundle. Included in this new package is the Weed Whacker Ear and Hair Nose Trimmer, which is waterproof and uses a 9,000 RPM motor-powered 360-degree rotary dual blade system. This is great stuff, guys. I use it regularly. I love mine. You can't go wrong. So get 20% off and free shipping with the code DYNASTY20 at manscaped.com. That is DYNASTY20 at manscaped.com. Also, every purchase at manscaped.com goes towards contributing to the Testicular Cancer Society to bring awareness to testicular cancer, men's health, and early cancer detection. So get 20% off and free shipping with the code DYNASTY20 at manscaped.com.
Now, one of the guys that Rick Patterson spent a lot of time was with Eddie Watts. Eddie was a great independent wrestler across Canada. He spent time in Prairie provinces. He was in Vancouver. He was in Atlantic. And I'm sure that he has got a lot of traveling stories about his time with Eddie Watts. Have you got any good ones for us?
Well, yeah, Eddie was out in Winnipeg there when Rick was still out there. And on weekends, Rick would work as a bouncer at a bar. Well, one time there was actually a welfare day, and his family was inside the bar. And the mother and father were getting pretty drunk, and they wanted to go home. Well, something broke out where everybody had a big argument. Well, Rick had to go in and try and break up the argument, and Eddie has his friend as backup. Well, all of a sudden, all hell breaks. The owner gets called. The owner comes in and sees the place half wrecked and just laughs it off. Well, Rick thought they were going to go to jail, but, and then lose his job and stuff. Rick got his introduction to Eddie Watts.
At least the two of them were able to take out those other six. So I'm sure that he's got lots of other stories about Eddie, but let's move on. Let's talk about what happened with Leatherface. Now, Leatherface was the biggest part of Rick's career to date, and that's who Rick is right now. He's Leatherface. This is a big transition because he was always a babyface, a tall, good-looking blonde guy in his younger wrestling roles. How did it happen that he transitioned to becoming Leatherface and became this much more hardcore style?
Well, as mentioned in the previous question, it all started out, his first trip to Japan was booked by Eddie Watts, his friends. Well, thanks to, world champion in Puerto Rico, got him booked was Victor Quinones. And they were both booked in Japan at the same time with Kendo Nagasaki. Well, that trip with Eddie was with Bob Orton Jr., a young Johnny Hawk, who later became known in the WWE as JBL. Well, when Rick was on the road, he was on the road with guys like Tracy Smothers, who just passed away here a few months ago, and another wrestler they called Crash, who later become Hugh Morris in the WWE.
So he was in Japan for many, many years. In fact, he's been in Japan just recently. I think he was supposed to go back until the pandemic recently hit. Along the way, was it Eddie Watts that was continually getting him work there, or did he meet up with other people that were feeding him some of the Japanese work?
Yeah, it was pretty much Eddie.
And I remember there's one story about some trips that took place through South Africa. Some of those scenes sounded crazy, where they would have kind of no lights. They pull up cars to put the headlights on the ring, and it was a chaotic scene with no security. Who was it that Rick was traveling with through South Africa when he went through there?
Geez, I'm not exactly sure, but I can tell you that Rick did tell me that going to South Africa was quite the experience, and he did this one tour and they were working in a big stadium. Well, all of a sudden, gunshots started going off through the stadium, and holy, Rick ran for his life. Rick thought it was all over, and to this day, Rick says he did not enjoy going to South Africa at all.
It sounded like a scary scene. Now, Leatherface, the story is, was originally another guy who traveled through Stampede a little bit, the Corporal Kirshner character that transitioned to Leatherface. But then something happened, and Rick Patterson ended up taking over the Leatherface character and the gimmick. Do you know much about how that happened, how that came to be?
Yeah, that's correct. Mike Kirshner, later in the WWE, known as Corporal Kirshner, who incidentally did work some shows in Stampede Wrestling in that pre-1980 era. And what happened was Kirshner got into a little bit of trouble outside the wrestling time and ended up getting thrown in jail. So the promoter was really worried because the Leatherface was really, really over at that time. And they were worried that they were going to lose business because Leatherface couldn't be booked. So what they did is they came up with an idea and asked Rick if he would be interested in doing the character. And at first, Rick was pretty skeptical because he realized how over the gimmick was. So he thought it over. And after a little bit of thinking, and so he took it over. He took over that gimmick, and he did many, many tours with that gimmick.
And Leatherface became a phenomenon. If you watch those videos from Japan, you can see the fans screaming and running away from him. Once Leatherface came to Regina, and I saw Leatherface wrestle there in person, and it was an amazing scene. You had this small crowd of wrestling fans that ran up to Leatherface and cheered him on, and you had a whole bunch of fans that ran away in horror when he pulled out his chainsaw that was shooting sparks out of it. That was an amazing thing. There must be some great stories about how that chainsaw got rigged up to throw sparks from it.
Yeah, just as you mentioned there from that he was in Regina there for, I believe that would be the WFWA promoted by Tony Condello. Well, I believe that there was a little bit of time there that I do remember seeing pictures of Leatherface there, and I think he was wrestling a guy by the name of Massive Damage.
That's right, it was Massive Damage in Regina, that's right.
Yeah, who is still living in Alberta today. And still working, but not as hardcore as those matches. But yeah, the sparks and the chainsaw, yeah, that idea came up from Rick's good friend Eddie Watts, and So Rick he played around with the chainsaw, asked a few people how he could make it shoot sparks, and then eventually he tweaked it so it could shoot sparks. And pretty much there's more thanks to his good friend Eddie Watts.
So many good stories about Eddie. I mean, he was a great wrestler, but also he was very inspirational. He had great ideas. It's a shame he didn't go on to the big leagues of wrestling.
Oh, definitely. I think Rick enjoyed going over to Japan and South Korea and Mexico. Those were his favorite places to tour. I don't think he really cared about going to like WWE or WCW or maybe NWA, because a lot of the old NWA wrestlers actually did a lot of work in Japan. And there's a lot of pictures out there with Leatherface posing with these guys, like Barry Windham and all those guys during Ted DiBiase and all those guys, from NWA days.
Yeah, I'm going to put up some of those on the podcast. I'll have some pictures with Steve Williams, Dr. Death, Barry Windham, Mike Rotundo, Ted DiBiase. Of course, a lot of interaction with Mankind or Cactus Jack, Mick Foley, of course, Terry Funk. Now, some of his best matches from Japan were with Terry Funk and Cactus Jack. He must have traveled around with Foley and the Funker a lot. Any fun times that were had by all in those stories?
Well, here's a really good story that Rick told me personally in Vancouver when he traveled, when he was on the tour bus with traveling with Mick Foley, Cactus Jack. They were the only two foreigners on the tour. So they were the only two guys that could speak English pretty fluently. The rest of the wrestlers were Japanese or Korean, so they were very limited in the English. So what happened is going from town to town in these tour buses, Rick and Foley would sit in the very back of the bus. Well, during the trip, Mick would start shooting all these interviews and promos to Rick. And, all these promos that he would shoot to Rick, well, Rick said it was amazing because when Foley went to WWE and WWF, it was the very same promoter promos that he was shooting to Rick that he was shooting on TV. And then, this Mr. Sacco gimmick that he had going there in the Attitude Era for WWE, well, that was brought in, through the Japan. So when the boys would get their pay from the office, Foley would stuff all his money into this sock, and that's what he called Mr. Sacco, and that's where Mr. Sacco came from, was Japan.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So he must have got a great laugh later when he would see him on Raw, pulling out the sock out of his pants and putting it into people's mouths. It must have been a great, amazing story for Rick to look back on.
Well, when he was in Japan, when Foley was in Japan, he would tell Rick, he says, this sock, his name is Jack Sacco. Jack Sacco. And I'm not sure if that's what I think he would just call Mr. Sacco in WWE, and it was really over, but it was never Jack Sacco, but that's what it came out the first time. Jack Sacco.
Right. So another character that was there at the time was Terry Funk, of course, who's a legend, former NWA champion. But his later years saw him switch to hardcore, and so he must have had a lot of interactions with Leatherface. Obviously, he's a legend. He must have toured with Leatherface at that time, I guess.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, Terry Funk, another pre-1989 Stampede wrestler, and it's just amazing how these guys all end up, meeting each other in Japan and working each other and becoming good friends. And, oh yeah, Terry went hardcore and did a lot of good matches with Leatherface in the stadiums and, the death matches and, barbed wire and dog collar chain matches. The whole thing, Foley or I'm sorry, Terry Funk, he could do it all, and Rick just loved Terry for that.
So they must have toured around the buses. Now, I guess they would have gone for dinner together. And I know that Terry Funk and Mick Foley would always be mobbed by Japanese fans. Did Leatherface get mobbed by the fans? Were the fans more intimidated or scared of Leatherface?
Well, they were scared, but, they mobbed Terry. They mobbed Terry, because he's not wearing a mask. They can see his real face, so he doesn't look as scary as Leatherface, just that Leatherface would scare your mother. Scare your mother in the closet, that's for sure.
Now, Leatherface, of course, has been in Japan now for, it's going on 25 years, I guess. But he has had some tours through other places, too. So there's been some tours through Korea, for example. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened with those? I don't have as much information about those, but I think he worked more with somebody named Fabulous Fabio.
Yeah, Fabulous Fabio was a wrestler promoter in Vancouver. And he promoted the promotion called All-Star Pro Wrestling. Not the All-Star Wrestling, but the All-Star Pro Wrestling. Well, at that time, there was actually 3 promotions going in Vancouver. ICW promoter Timothy Flowers was running. All-Star Pro Wrestling, Fabulous Fabio. And he later had a business partner called by the name France. And the third was Extreme Canadian Championship Wrestling promoter Michelle Starr. So, Leatherface actually did a few shows with ECCW also. Michelle Starr brought in Leatherface and Jason the Terrible to work a few matches with guys like, the big Juggernaut, who he also liked hardcore, and he ended up doing some tours in South Korea with Rick also. So what happened was when Rick came to Vancouver for All-Star Pro Wrestling, Fabio had booked him and wanted to work a program with him. Well, Rick liked Fabio so much as a wrestler and a worker in the ring, he thought he would be a good fit for Japan because Fabio did have a little bit of experience for this more of a shoot style of wrestling that they love in Japan. So what they did is they actually started shooting each other in their matches during the shows that were held in Cloverdale, BC at the Ellis McKay Arena. And, after the shows, a lot of the smart fans that thought they knew, about the matches and stuff would go on some of these message boards and couldn't figure out and understand what their angle was. And, that made Rick laugh so much, that they could work a shoot style, but work for the show.
So when you're saying shoot style, do you mean kind of like what happened with Pancrase or UWF or something even like the new Bloodsport?
No, more like the stuff you see in UFC.
Okay, so a true mixed martial arts.
Yeah, it's all a lot of, in the Orient, you got your martial arts, with all your different styles, but, more of a hard-hitting kickboxing style of wrestling with a little bit of catch-as-can, and there is some pancreas styles in some of the promotions in Japan too. So you got to be pretty prepared when you go over to Japan, and so that the whole idea of these guys, working this UFC style in Canada was to get them prepared for their tours in South Korea. And yes, Fabio did very well in South Korea, and some of those shoot fighters in Korea got a little bit scared of Fabio because they didn't know what to expect. And you know what? The promoter really loved that. They really love Fabio for that. And and that's what made him do so well when he went to Korea.
Now, with Leatherface's background in judo, I'm sure he was a good transition for that. You were a manager for Fabio and Leatherface back about what is it, 17, 18 years ago? Can you tell us about some of the shows that you were at in British Columbia at that time?
Yeah, that was around 2002, I believe. Well, it's kind of a long story how I wasn't Fabio's manager, but I I became Leatherface's manager. It's very ironic how I became his manager because just before I became his manager, Fabio wanted me to come out as a manager for a tag team that they were doing one show for in Cloverdale for the original Jason the Terrible from Stampede Wrestling that they had brought in. He had a tag team partner, an East Indian guy by the name of Machete Singh. Well, they wanted me to come out with those two guys. And so I went home and I kind of thought, well, I'm going to go out as their manager. Well, I got to come up with a character. Well, I came up with this character. So pretty similar to Jason the Terrible. So I pretty much came out with coveralls and, I wore all black and I wore a little street hockey mask. And then what I did is I carried a Filipino martial arts stick with me. And I would just carry it in front of me. So when I came out with the boys, my tag team, I walked so slow, And the character's name was Roz. And so what happened is Roz caused a little bit of havoc in this tag team match, and it was a double count out, and things got out of hand, and so that carried on. Rick really loved that. He loved seeing that, so he wanted me to come out as his manager, and because our gimmicks, we were both under the hoods and stuff, and we looked scary. So that's how I became Leatherface's manager in Vancouver. And we worked a couple shows out in Chilliwack, and we did a BC Northern tour. We went up north on the Alaska Highway. We went to Prince George. We went all over northern BC, and that's what I did. I came out as Leatherface's manager.
That's a cool story. Fabio is still wrestling on and off in British Columbia. Do you have contact with him still?
I talked to him last year, and he did a all-star wrestling now that was running before COVID hit in Cloverdale. They had a title called the Legends title, and he was the Legends champion for a while, and he was doing a program with another wrestler. I can't remember his name. Rex Oden, I think, was his name, or some name like that. They were doing a little bit of a program, but that's a couple years ago, and I don't think Fabio really does a whole lot in the wrestling business anymore. Being a captain in the fire department and stuff. Plus, he has his own side business when he's away from the fire department and stuff. But a lot of people don't realize that Fabio was he was also in the old All-Star Wrestling and worked for Al Tomko. He was one of the Robotrons. I believe there was 3 of the Robotrons, but there is interviews out there on the internet, and you can hear Fabio under that hood as one of the Robotrons. And at that time, when it was actually out, we used to watch All-Star Wrestling on Saturdays. It came on after Stampede Wrestling. It came on at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I remember seeing the Robotrons, and I thought, you know what? I really liked those guys. I thought they were so cool. And then, like 20-some years later, it was so funny that he became my promoter, and he also became my boss because I used to work for him in his side business. So, it's funny how the world works.
It's truly a small world. Now, coming back to the shoot fighting, so we talked a little bit about how Leatherface was involved with that. Were there any other fighters that Leatherface had a lot of interaction with?
Well, if you're saying in reference to when he was in Vancouver, yes. That little fight club thing that they had going on wasn't just Fabio. There was a couple of other wrestlers involved too, eh? There was a couple of wrestlers by the name of Kenny Lush and the Bad Bomber, Nelson Creed. Those two guys at that time, they were involved with this little fight club angle that they had going. So what was happening was Kenny and Bomber. They were going to do some training for this UFC style at a club. So they were learning it. So Rick thought it would be a good idea for him to get a few lessons from them, and so they taught him, and people and the boys, they were catching on pretty fast. So eventually, when they hit Korea, then boy, oh boy, Leatherface would have to back off to some of these Korean shooter guys because they were pretty intense. But not Kenny. Kenny never backed down from any of those guys. And you know what? The promoter seen that in his eyes and decided to put the tag team belts on Kenny and Leatherface for a couple tours. And that's just for, Kenny stepping up to the plate, showing his ways in the business. And that was just something they really liked in Japan, especially the office really liked to see that kind of stuff. And, being a foreigner and stuff, and it just drew more money for the promotion.
That's great. And Kenny Lush and Nelson Creed are both very active in BC still. Of course, the pandemic has shut things down for the last year, but both of them are very active in All-Star as well as ECCW wrestling.
Yeah, Kenny would, just before the pandemic, Kenny tried to run shows out in Vancouver. He started up a promotion called Wise Pro Wrestling, and they ran at a venue on East Hastings Street. I'm just trying to think of the venue. I can't exactly sure. They ran 2 or 3 shows, and then the city decided to shut them down because they weren't considered a sport.
Yeah, that was going on between 2016 and 2017. It was actually at a place called the Wise Hall. It's kind of a hall/pub bar, and they converted it from kind of a night place, like a bar or a club, to a wrestling show for those events.
Yeah, I've seen a video clip on YouTube and showing Kenny and another guy ended up fighting out in the middle of Hastings Street.
Sometimes on Hastings Street, that's not too unusual to see.
Oh, no. One time I went to an ECCW show when they were running at a venue at the Russian Community Center. They'd run many, many shows at the Russian Community Center. And I remember going to one show and the Scotty Mack was fighting somebody, and they ended up outside the middle of West 4th.
So that's great. So General CJ, I want to thank you so much for your time and telling us some great stories. I want to thank Leatherface for supplying a lot of that information about the stories that we talked about today. I know Leatherface is going to be making some trips back to the Asian countries of both Korea and Japan, and hopefully the next year or so. So hopefully everything goes great with those tours. Any last things you'd like to talk about, or any last things you'd like to promote?
Yeah, everybody just keep safe out there, and eventually the wrestling is going to be back in your town one day. And I know out here in Alberta, you know, there's a couple of training centers that I have, one out in Calgary. You know, they're having a rally in Calgary. There's some place downtown, and Bruce Hart and one of the owners of the training center are going to be doing a speech, you know, and getting the government to get, you know, get our fitness back. There's no gyms hardly running here in Alberta. You can't go to the gym. You know, people are I think, starting to get fed up.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I saw Bruce Hart's going to be at a Freedom rally. It's actually today, I believe, in Calgary.
That might be the one I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, it's good to see people involved in getting things back to a more normal life. So thank you very much, General CJ. I appreciate all your time today. It's been great to interact with you.
I would like to just say one more thing here, that I know you're going to be putting up some pictures on the podcast, and I hope everybody enjoys the pictures, you know, of Leatherface and his great career in Japan, and, you know, and all the great wrestlers that he's worked with in Japan and Korea, and, you know, and in between. So thanks for that. And
Absolutely.
I'm sure Rick's going to really enjoy it when he sees the podcast come out.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got some great pictures we're going to put up. A lot of the stories go around those pictures. But if you've ever seen Leatherface with his sparks flying out of his chainsaw, some of the pictures are amazing to see.
A couple of videos would be nice too. You know, it's always seen nice live video.
Yeah, you know, just saying that, I'm going to put a link up there about the baseball stadium match with Terry Funk. That's a classic.
Yeah, I seen one there when Mick Foley was doing a interview in the back with Leatherface. That was a nice little segment that they had going on.
Absolutely. I'll see if I can find that and put that link up as well.
Yeah, I'm sure the fans will want to see Mick Foley out in Japan, that's for sure.
All right. Well, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy Sunday. Appreciate your time, General CJ. Best of luck in the future.
Yes, thank you very much for having me on your show again.
No problem at all.
And good luck.
Absolutely.
If you are looking for the best books, DVDs, and posters on classic wrestling nostalgia, then you want to visit crowbarpress.com. There are literally dozens of titles there, including biographies of the likes of Bruiser Brody, Ole Anderson, Ivan Koloff, and of course, Dick the Bruiser, as we've spoke about here on the Dave Dynasty Show. You want to visit crowbarpress.com for all of your classic wrestling nostalgia needs. Again, that is crowbarpress.com.
Well, that was a great podcast, and we hope you enjoyed General CJ talking about old stories of Rick Patterson / Leatherface. Now we're going to end the podcast with pure chaos. Imagine being in Kurikan Hall for IWA Japan as this music starts to play, and then a wild man with a Leatherface mask on, along with a sparks-generating chainsaw, runs into the arena, chasing fans from their seats, creating total chaos. Imagine that as this audio plays us to the end of the podcast today, and thank you so much for joining us.